Here we are at an introduction to subordinators, and I want you to think of that formula that we're trying to find in writing. And your sentence combining workbook will introduce you to subordinators. What follows is an introduction to complex sentences. So the other sentence type that use the coordinate conjunctions, we call that one the compound sentence. And this one, if you can see that structure and you see the pattern, we can call this one the complex sentence. So to write a complex sentence, you will use your list of subordinators in your sentence combining workbook. Complex sentence using subordinates can be written in several ways. These are just 3 ways. So we have the first formula, and it begins with a subordinator. Then it presents a subject plus a verb, followed by a comma, a subject plus a verb, and a period. So the first part with the subordinator is called a dependent clause, and we place a comma right after the dependent clause. In the second formula, it's the reverse order. So we present the subject plus the verb, the subordinator, the subject plus the verb, and we do not place a comma before the subordinator when the dependent clause is in the second half of the sentence. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the first formula. A couple examples of that. So here we have again the subordinator plus the subject plus a verb, a comma, a subject plus a verb, and we see that pattern. So it's the dependent clause and the independent clause. So I like to think of this as a mixed fraction. So this is a fraction and this is a whole number. And here we go. When I read La Esquives like water for chocolate, comma, I fell in love with books. So here we see the subordinator. We have our subject and verb, a comma, a subject and verb. I'm going to read you another example. So we have a subordinator after Sofia listened to Paco de Lucia, comma, she was inspired to play guitar. So we have a subordinator, a subject, a verb, a comma, a subject and a verb, and we call this the dependent clause and the independent clause. So again, I like to think of this as a mixed fraction. You must have a whole sentence and a half a sentence. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the second formula. So the second formula, another way to write a complex sentence is basically the reversed order. So you have the independent clause followed by the dependent clause, but notice that we do not use a comma. So in our first example, basically what I did, I just reversed the order. So I fell in love with books when I read La Esquives like water for chocolate. Here we have the independent clause followed by the dependent clause, and notice that we do not place a comma before or after the when. In our second example, we have an independent clause and a dependent clause. So we have Sofia was inspired to play guitar when she listened to Paco de Lucia. So we have a subject and a verb. We have our subordinator, when, and she listened to Paco de Lucia. So again, it's that idea that I'm trying to see if maybe I can share with you, and you can also try to look for in writing. So we have this independent clause and also the dependent clause. It is like a fraction in writing. It would be incomplete if you would only see this in if somebody would write when she listened to Paco de Lucia is a dependent clause. It's a fragment. So we have a third formula. So most college textbooks do not introduce students to this sophisticated, complex sentence type. In this example, notice that a dependent clause interrupts the independent clause. And I want to go ahead and share this sentence type with you because as writers, we have all these tools that enrich our writing, and I want to share this with you. So we have the subject, the dependent clause that interrupts the complete sentence. So we have Sophia, comma, when she was a child, comma, wanted to reach for the stars. And here we see the dependent clause interrupting the subject and the verb. In this next example, we have Luciano interrupted by the dependent clause, since he was 3, could perform in front of an audience. And here we have another example of the dependent clause interrupting the main clause. And this is also a complex sentence. So now it's time to practice using subordinators in your own writing, as well as identifying subordinators' complex sentences in the writing of others. Let's practice joining sentences with subordinators in your sentence combining workbook.